Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm going to talk for a few minutes about NATO. But before I do that, I want to make two preliminary points. I believe that America's aid to Ukraine is not charity. I believe that that aid is in America's security, national security interest. And I have voted accordingly. I am convinced, Madam President, that Vladimir Putin, President Xi Jinping, and the Ayatollah in Iran are working together. I am convinced, Madam President, that their objective is to have Russia dominate Central and Eastern Europe, the Ayatollah from Iran dominate the Middle East, and China, through President Xi, dominate the Indo-Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South America. And that is not a world that is safe for the United States of America. That certainly isn't a world that is safe for democracy. That's point one. Point two, I have been sorely disappointed at the refusal of the United States Senate to appoint or to pass a bill that would allow the president to appoint, confirmed by the United States Senate, a special inspector general to follow the money in Ukraine. Once again, I have voted to send that money to Ukraine, not as an act of charity, but because I believe it is in America's national security interest. But that money didn't just fall from heaven. That money that we sent to Ukraine, we thank heaven for it, but it came out of the pockets of the American taxpayer. And I understand that we have an inspector general from the Department of Defense following the money, and I don't mean to be overtly critical. I will point out, as an aside, that I find it somewhat ironic. The Department of Defense Inspector General says we've got this, but yet the Department of Defense has never been audited. Ever. Never. The Department of Defense is the only agency in the United States government that has never been audited. And the American people know that. That's why I and a number of my colleagues have asked this Senate to pass a bill to allow the president to pick a special inspector general of his choosing to be confirmed by the United States Senate to follow every single dollar that we're sending to Ukraine, and to answer to the members of the Senate, members of the House, and most importantly to the American people. Many Republicans and many Democrats have supported that effort, but many Democrats and many Republicans on both sides of the aisle have refused. Now, I'm going to keep trying, Madam President. But as I said, this money didn't just fall from heaven. It came out of people's pockets. A word about NATO. For the past 18 months, the United States and our NATO allies have worked together to support our Ukrainian friends as they push back against Russian President Vladimir Putin's violent attack on their sovereignty. Putin's war in Ukraine is illegal, and it has presented one of the most serious challenges that NATO, the National Atlantic Treaty Organization, has faced in decades. Now, as with many challenges in life, Madam President, I believe that the difficulties we face today can make NATO stronger tomorrow. I believe that. But that'll only happen if we are honest with each other. Friends tell friends the truth. Friends tell friends the truth. And here's the truth as I see it. NATO is one of the most impactful defense pacts in all of human history. The United States is a proud NATO member. The American people support NATO. But it is also no secret that some of our friends in NATO have not been taking their own defense and defense spending seriously. And they had not been taking their own defense and defense spending seriously even before Vladimir Putin began his illegal assault on Ukraine. As the full extent of Putin's cruelty unfolded last year, Madam President, NATO leaders, they appeared at first to regard it as a wake-up call, and that's a good thing. It was a wake-up call for many people throughout the world. But somehow, over the past year, those same countries fell back asleep. You see, when Putin began his march into Ukraine, key NATO leaders said that they would start spending 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. That's a promise that they had made before, but had reneged on until Putin's assault. But it took less than a year after Putin entered Ukraine for those same leaders to begin to renege again. And that's just a fact, Madam President. Friends tell friends the truth. Recent analysis shows that as of today, just 11 out of the 31 countries currently in NATO are on track to fulfill their 2% defense spending obligation. Now, this is becoming a frustrating pattern for some of our NATO allies. As a smart person once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. And that's the case here. And if you take a look at NATO today and compare it to NATO in 2024, it frankly would make Michael Avenatti blush. Let me paint the picture for you, Madam President. NATO countries first agreed to spend 2% of their gross domestic product on defense in 2006. The 2% figure was designed, as you know, Madam President, to be a floor, not a ceiling. And this didn't mean, this promise made by all NATO countries in 2006, this didn't mean that each country was required to cut a check to NATO. That's not what it meant. It just meant that each country would spend 2% of its gross domestic product on itself, in its own military, and in its own national security. Why? Because all NATO countries understood then that our alliance was stronger when everyone pulled their weight. Now, we know a lot of what has happened since then. The world economy sank into a recession in 2008. We all felt the brunt of that, including the American people. But for some of our friends in NATO, that 2% commitment fell apart. And after the Great Recession, as we call it, just 3 NATO members, 3 fulfilled their promise to invest 2% or more in defense. And you know who took note? Vladimir Putin. In 2014, fast forward a few years, Putin invaded Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. Putin made it clear that he intended to take that key block of land on the Black Sea and make it his own, and he did. This was a blatant violation of Ukrainian sovereignty. It was an unmistakable foreshadowing as well of what would come. Now, Putin's aggression outraged NATO. It should have. It outraged all fair-minded, freedom-loving people. And at a conference that year, 2014, in Wales, each member country of NATO reaffirmed their commitment to spend 2% of their GDP on defense by 2024. And at the time, President Obama was president. And in a speech at the conference in Wales, where each country pledged to spend 2%, the second time it made the pledge, President Obama said, and I quote, "This commitment makes clear that NATO will not be complacent." I remember when the president said that. President Obama also said, "Our alliance will reverse the decline in defense spending and rise to meet the challenges that we face in the 21st century." And he later added, quote, "Here in Wales, we also sent a strong message to Russia that actions have consequences." Well, that turned out to be debatable. By 2021, just a few years later, only 7 NATO members were spending the minimum 2% on defense. And that's just a fact. Friends tell friends the truth. In fact, President Trump was met with scorn when he asked our friends in NATO to keep their word and reinvest in defense. Germany's foreign minister, Heiko Maas, said, and I quote, "Our common response today to the President of the United States and his assertion of America first must be Europe united." Apparently, Germany and others felt that upholding their pledge to spend 2% on their own defense was somehow an America first policy. And you know who took note? Vladimir Putin. Flash forward to 2022. Putin's tanks are rolling further into Ukraine. And just like in 2014, our NATO friends issued statements, a third time, once again, pledging to spend 2% of their gross domestic product on their own security. Yet today, despite Putin's ongoing attack on Ukraine, today, some of our friends in NATO have already stopped or postponed their 2% spending plans. And that's just a fact. Friends tell friends the truth. French President Macron, for example, promised to increase France's defense spending in the days following Putin's invasion. I remember when he made that promise. But French officials have also announced that it will take until 2025 to hit the 2% defense spending threshold. Similarly, Italy announced it would not hit 2% until 2028. Spain said it won't hit its 2% goal until 2029. And Belgium said it won't hit its 2% goal until 2035. The war is going on. To be fair, Belgium and Spain, both good friends of America, have made some small progress in their defense spending over the past year. I want to make that clear. They may come through eventually. But France's spending has hardly changed at all. And Italy will actually spend less on defense this year, in the middle of the war, which is happening in Europe, than it did in 2021, before Putin even entered Ukraine. Germany's failure to follow through on its 2% commitment is especially disappointing and consequential. As the world's fourth largest economy, Germany is the world's fourth largest economy, behind only the United States of America, China, and Japan. The world's fourth largest economy. So Germany's defense spending shortfall, and it is a shortfall, leaves a much bigger hole. We're talking about a lot of money. Germany will only spend 1.6% of its GDP on defense in 2023. That's $18.1 billion short of the commitment that it has made not once, not twice, but 3 times. Now, NATO is an alliance. It means we're friends, and we are. It means we know that we're stronger together. It means that if you come for one of us, you're going to have to fight all of us. That's what it means. And at the end of the day, an alliance, though, is just a promise. That's all it is. But it's built on mutual trust. And it states that we won't leave each other to fight threats alone. And that's what NATO is supposed to stand for. And I'm very proud of that. And so are the American people. We support NATO. But when countries in NATO choose not to keep their commitment to spend 2% on their own defense, they weaken the alliance of NATO. It shows us, and it shows our enemies, that we cannot count on those countries to step up to help keep all of us safe. And it tells Putin that some NATO members are content sitting back and waiting rather than remaining strong together. And that's just a fact. Friends tell friends the truth. Now, the United States of America, we keep our promises. And all along, every year, through the history of NATO, we have proudly invested in our defense to the benefit of our allies, to our own benefit, but to the benefit of our allies. And it was important to our allies in Europe. It was. I don't know what would have happened in Europe had the American people not come to Ukraine's rescue. Putin may be in Paris right now, for all I know. God forbid. Now, a few of our NATO friends have kept their commitment, and I want to thank them. Our friends in Greece, for example, our friends in the United Kingdom, our friends in Estonia, they spent 2% of their GDP on defense before Putin invaded. And our friends in Lithuania and in Hungary and Romania and Slovakia, they'll all reach the 2% threshold by the end of this year. And that's a good thing. Thank you, Greece. Thank you, United Kingdom. Thank you, Estonia. Thank you, Lithuania and Hungary and Romania and Slovakia, for keeping your word. Now, Finland just joined NATO. We're so pleased. Our friends in Finland spent 2% on defense before joining NATO. But they didn't use the alliance as a reason to take their foot off the gas. Instead, Finland recently increased its defense spending even more to 2.4% of GDP. Thank you, Finland. I hope our allies who have been nestled safely under the NATO umbrella for years without pulling their financial weight will take note of Finland's dedication. Let me say it again. Thank you, Finland. And we've got to commend Poland. Poland spent 2% on defense long before Putin invaded Ukraine. But over the past 2 years, it hadn't spent 2%. Poland hasn't. It's nearly doubled its defense spending to 4.3%. 3%. It's investing that money in part by buying American weapons, and it's showing Putin that Poland is serious about its sovereignty and that Poland is serious about freedom. By the end of this decade, Poland is on pace to have more tanks than the United Kingdom, than Germany, than France, than the Netherlands, than Belgium, and Italy put together. Put together. Thank you, Poland. Now, I understand you don't have to be mincing material to understand that Putin's threat is more visceral when it's happening next door. And of course, Poland is much closer to Russia than Germany or France is. I get that. But when you're allies, when you're friends, when you've promised not once, not twice, but 3 times to have each other's back, you're not only supposed to think of yourself and your proximity to the threat. You know, as Americans, we've got an entire ocean between us and Russia. We've got an entire ocean as our buffer against Putin's tanks. But I doubt that Germany or France, both good friends, love them to death, but I doubt that Germany or France would support the United States backing away because we aren't close enough to the shelling to be bothered. Let me be frank. Allies through NATO have pledged to have each other's backs. And I see no sense in bubble wrapping it. That starts by putting your money where your mouth is. And let me be frank again. Some of our friends in NATO have engaged in a cycle of broken promises, time and time and time again. Putin shows his cruel aggression, and horrified European leaders pledge to invest in defense. Then Putin's aggression maybe falls off the front page of the paper, and leaders forget their promise to invest until Putin's rockets start blowing up another city. It has been more than a year, Madam President, as you know as well as I do, since Putin sent Russian tanks and troops into Ukraine. And maybe for some, the horror of it all is worn off. Maybe. It hasn't worn off for most Americans. And it sure hadn't worn off for Ukraine. Citizens of a sovereign Ukraine are still dodging missiles on their own streets. And Putin is still watching too many NATO members bury their heads and drag their feet. And so is President Xi Jinping. Now, Madam President, I don't mean to offend anyone. I don't. But friends tell friends the truth. And everyone in NATO is a friend. And I am so proud that the United States of America is a member of NATO. But NATO is only as strong as our confidence in one another. If we want to strengthen NATO's ability to deter bad actors from bad acts, we've each got to do our part. It's time for all of us in NATO to start keeping our promises and investing in our defense. The American people have sent over $100 billion to fight Putin in Ukraine. And I don't regret a single penny. We've kept our word. But again, friends tell friends the truth. Not all of our allies in NATO have. And it is time they put their money where their mouth is. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Will the senator withdraw his request?
I will happily withdraw my request. Can wrap it up.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.